All right, Exodus chapter 19, and I'm gonna start back. I know we've done the first 6 verses, but I'm gonna start back and read them again, just for funsies, and then we'll just give some commentary on this as we kind of go around what we're doing here. So, Exodus 19, beginning in chapter 1. In the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, okay, we're 3 months removed from the Red Sea event and the plagues. On the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, for they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain of God, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob." Now, emphasis here that Moses is going to be the one saying things. So in your mind, you need to have it etched out. Moses is the messenger. Moses is the messenger of the old covenant. Jesus will be the messenger of the new covenant. He will be the one that will lay the groundwork and the stipulations. If you want to make a note, I would write down Malachi chapter 3 and verse 1. Moses is the messenger. He's going to go back and forth and talk to God. Let me just show you this right quick. Go over to Malachi chapter 3. Just real fast. Just so you can kind of get a feel for what I'm talking about. Malachi chapter 3, verse 1 says this. Behold, we're not ready, sorry. Malachi 3:1, last book of the Old Testament. I'm in Exodus 19, but I'm already chasing a rabbit 2 verses in. Malachi 3:1 says, "Behold, I send my messenger," and Jesus ascribes that first messenger there to being John the Baptist. "He will prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight." So you think about Jesus' teaching, he's the one that's going to... We did this in Matthew 5. We can go back to Exodus now. But think about Jesus' teaching. He was the one constantly saying, "You have heard it said, but I say. You have heard it said, but I say." He wasn't saying that the law was wrong. He was just getting to the true intent and the spiritual meaning of it, the actual application of the law. So, like the law said that you can't commit adultery with your neighbor's wife. And Jesus says, "You've heard it said that you should not commit adultery. But I say to you that if you look at a woman with lust, then you've done so in your heart." So think about Jesus being the one who laid the message of the foundation of the new covenant. Moses is the messenger of the old covenant. He's the one talking to God. Verse 3, Exodus 19. "Moses went up to God, and the Lord called from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Every time you see eagle's wings, it needs to be an idea of God protecting a group of people. That's going to occur over and over and over in the Bible. When you get to the prophets, Jeremiah and Isaiah are going to mention the same thing. What's the famous verse? You all know it better than I do. Yeah, Isaiah, when he's talking about mounting them up on eagle's wings. Okay, that's just the idea that God's going to protect this people. Okay, you see the same thing in Revelation 12 when God mounts the church up on eagle's wings and protects them. All right, let me keep going. "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, You've seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." All right, now right there, I would make a note. This is the idea that God is bringing them into covenant with Him, brought you to myself. They are going to be wed to Him. The Bible gives a couple different pictures about people in covenant status and relationship. Number one, they're pictured as His bride. Okay? Israel was God's bride. They were in covenant with Him. But also they were pictured of His son, Hosea chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. So you get the idea that they're going to be sons, that they're going to be wed to Him. You get all these different motifs that the Bible builds on, and that's one of them. So, anyway, verse 5. "Now therefore," here we go, "if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." Notice the conditions of the covenant. I would make the note that both covenants are conditional. That the Old Covenant and the New Covenant are conditional. You say, Zach, how is the Old Covenant conditional? Well, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you obey the covenant, you're going to be extremely blessed. If you break the covenant and you disobey, okay, if you disobey, then you're going to face the covenant cursings. All right? How can you say the New Covenant is conditional? Well, the New Covenant is conditional on works as well, but not on your works. They're conditional upon the works of Christ, and His work is finished, and His obedience to the covenant is applied to all of us if we're obedient to what God has called us to do. Well, what has God called us to do? It's not by our works, but it's by what? Faith. It's always about faith. Faith and faith and faith and faith and faith. Even these people in the Old Covenant who couldn't keep the covenant because nobody could ever keep the conditions that were set before them perfectly, let me emphasize perfectly there, still by faith, when they died, they were still awaiting the Messiah, and it's by faith in Hebrews 11 that Abraham, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith. The people who are right with God, it's always by faith and never by works. The purpose of the Old Covenant is to demonstrate you and I are never going to be right because of our works. Ever. We can't be. That puts every one of us on equal level playing field. Romans chapter 3 verse 23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All, Jew and Gentile. There's no man that hasn't transgressed and broke God's covenant and God's law. That's the way that I view that. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 7. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people. Where did Israel get these elders? Remember a couple chapters ago that Moses had a line so long it looked like everybody was standing outside waiting on a big book release or something up at Barnes & Noble's, right? So we've got to, okay, that was not a good example. That was terrible, actually. But Moses had a line so long they were having to stand out there all day, and Moses was tired and the people were tired. Do y'all remember who came to Moses and said, hey, you might want to appoint some other people to take care of some of this stuff? His father-in-law. What was his name? Jethro. Very good. Moses' father-in-law Jethro came and said, hey, appoint some guys to help you, and if there's a matter that they can't figure out, then they can bring it to you. Now, if Moses is the one that's making all these decisions, we could say that Moses was sitting in the seat as the what? What was he? Say it again. He was sitting in the seat as the judge. And if there was an accusation to be brought against the people, according to the law, who was the one making the accusation to bring it against them? Moses. Moses was sitting in the seat of accusation. Moses was sitting in the seat as judge to the people. We good with that? All right, watch this. Go to John chapter 5. Let's look at verse 41. John 5:41. I do not receive honor from men, but I know you, and that you do not have the love of God in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, you will receive him. How can you believe who receive honor from one another, and do not seek the honor that comes from the only God? Do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. Watch this. Do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. See that? What does he mean Moses accuses them? Well, it's the stipulations of that old covenant that those religious leaders were under that would stand to accuse them, just as Moses stood to judge and accuse the people back in his day. Those standings in the law of Moses were still in play. Make sense, everybody? Same concept. Verse 46. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me. How can he say that? For he wrote about me. When did Moses write about Jesus? We talked about it last week. Who wrote the book of Deuteronomy? Moses did. Who wrote chapter 18 of Deuteronomy when it said that there would be a prophet that would come that they should hear? Moses did. And who was that prophet? Jesus. Deuteronomy 18 again. But if you do not believe his writings, Moses' writings, how will you believe my words? Okay, let me give you another example of Moses sitting in the seat. Go over to Matthew 23. Remember, the seat of Moses was the seat of power. It was the seat of accusation. It was the seat of judgment. He had the ability to do that. And Moses did it faithfully and righteously. Okay? Let me make an emphasis on that. Hold your spot in Matthew chapter 23, and I'll show you something. Hold your spot in Matthew 23 and go to Hebrews 4. I think it's Hebrews 4. It might be Hebrews 3. I didn't plan on doing this, but this is free. You don't have to pay me any extra. Yeah, let's look at 3. Moses was faithful to his people, faithful in his house, faithful as a judge, faithful in upholding righteousness and his standing of his role as the messenger in the covenant. That's an important deal. Hebrews chapter 3, look at verse 1. Everybody ready? Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house. Everybody see that? Moses was faithful in the work that he did and passing judgment, faithful in the role that God had given him. So now, if you were a descendant from that line of Moses and you were in charge of the covenant that Moses left you, you would want to sit in the same seat as Moses because that meant you were the person that was in power. Make sense? All right. Look at Matthew 23. Beginning in verse 1. Matthew 23, verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and said to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in what? See that? So, they're the ones that stood to accuse and stood to judge, the accuser of the brethren. Note that for later, if you've been thinking that realm. So, there's your same idea. That's everywhere. They love that. Moses was the one passing that judgment. They did it too. Jesus said, therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works. For they say and do not do, for they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders. But they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Okay? We good? So they were using the law to cause their bondage to be hard. Well, they were unfaithful in the way that they ruled the covenant. Moses was faithful in his house, in his judgments, and his accusations. All right, back to Exodus. And if you're in my Sunday school class, I'm probably going there this Sunday again too. Okay, let's look at verse 6. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests. We talked about 1 Peter chapter 2, how God changed it from old covenant Israel to the new covenant church in the first century. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. Now just think about it. Moses is like he's like a messenger. He's going up and down the mountain, going to talk with God, coming back down to talk to the people, going to talk with God, coming back down. He goes up, God says, here's the covenant. Here's the stipulations. Go see if the people want in on it or not. All right? Good. They want in on it, Lord. They said we're good. All right? Well, here's what you tell them. If you do this, you're going to be blessed. And if you do this, you're not going to be blessed. Sound like Adam in the garden? It's exactly like Adam in the garden. Same idea. Here, God is giving them the law, just as Adam ate of the tree of knowledge and good and evil. What did the law tell the people? What was good and what was evil. Okay. Verse 8. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. All right, now let's think about this. What two offices is it that Moses is participating in? When Moses goes from the top of the mountain and gets God's words and takes it to the people and tells it to them, what office is that? Okay, messenger, give me another one. Give me I'm thinking of the big three. Yeah, priest. Okay, that's the role of prophet, is when you go from God to the people. You get the message from God and you take it to the people. And that's the role of prophet. When he turns around and goes back up the mountain, he goes to the people for God. Then what's he acting as? Priest. The prophet goes to the people for God. The priest goes to God for the people, because the people can't go to God. They've got to have an intercessor. Moses is the intercessor going to meet with God for the people. Okay. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, behold, watch this, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud. How is the glory of God going to appear to the people? In the what? In the cloud. And that is all over the Bible. Think Acts chapter 1. That's the picture of God's glory and Jesus in the cloud. Behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. Now, anytime you get this idea of people about to come before God, you're always going to have a washing ceremony that's there. John the Baptist had a washing ritual and ceremony. People had to have their clothes cleaned or clothes changed. You might remember whenever Joseph is raised up out of the pit and seated at the right hand of Pharaoh, he's given new robes, he's clothed. You might remember that Jesus, before he was crucified, they put the clothes on him. That's the righteous picture. Jesus in the first century spiritually was clothing the saints. The fine linen, the clothing, was the righteous acts of the saints. You always get this idea. Adam and Eve, they were clothed in the garden, so you've got to have this clothing from God. Why? Well, because the picture is that whenever people are given the knowledge of the Lord, that they realize your shame and your nakedness. And think about it. That's what's happened to me and you. We realized that whenever we read that God was holy and His commandments and what He said, that we weren't good enough and couldn't measure up. That always existed for us, but when we heard the message of the gospel, it became evident to us that we were in sin and that we needed an alien righteousness. We needed foreign righteousness, not our own. We needed to be clothed in the righteousness of Christ. How do we get that? Through believing in Him. So God has clothed us in that manner. Before they come to God, they have to wash their garments. Okay? And you get the idea of washing garments all over the place, especially toward the end of the book. Okay. Consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for what day? A lot of things happen on the third day in the book, people. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for all the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Okay? We can't even touch the mountain. We can't touch the mountain or the base of the mountain. Okay? There's going to be a point where Moses takes the 70 elders halfway up the mountain. We good? The people got to stay in the outer court at the bottom. The 70 elders can go like the priest halfway up the mountain. And then Moses, the high priest, can go all the way up to the top of the mountain to meet with God. You all have heard me enough say that. I think we ought to be able to get that by now. So, okay. But notice how nobody can touch it, because the worship of God after Adam breaks the covenant is always at a distance. The purpose of Jesus is so that you and I don't have to worship God at a distance. We can worship God in His presence and see Him face to face, because we've been fully clothed with His righteousness, not our own and anything else. He brings us back into the Holy of Holies. Let me put it in this story. If Jesus had accomplished already everything that Jesus was going to accomplish and has now accomplished, you and I would get to walk to the very top of the mountain to meet with God, just like Moses did, back in His presence. And we wouldn't just see His backside. We would see Him face to face, because that's the picture of what Christ has done for us. He's fully restored us to the presence of God. That's the good news of the gospel. But they're at a distance still. Notice this too. The writer of Hebrews hints at this. Well, actually, he quotes it. Let me show you this if you got time. If you don't have time, you'll just have to make it. Go to Hebrews chapter 12. No, we got time. Hebrews chapter 12. All right, look over with me at verse 18. All right, so this is the establishment of the new covenant. What we're reading in Exodus is the establishment of the old covenant. And notice how this is worded here by the writer of Hebrews in verse 18. For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burn with fire, to blackness and darkness and tempest, and the voice of a trumpet, and this is talking about Mount Sinai where they received the law, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the words should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure what was commanded, and if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I'm exceedingly afraid and trembling. Okay? So the writer of Hebrews is saying, we're establishing the new covenant, not the old covenant. You haven't come to Mount Sinai where the old covenant was established. Verse 22. You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly, or the New Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, who are registered where? In heaven. To God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better than that of Abel. They're not just coming to the mountain, friends. They're fixing to walk up to the top of the mountain, back in the presence of God in the New Jerusalem. That's the whole picture. We went from a distance back now to intimacy. So I can't labor that out too far. Let's go back to Exodus so I can finish. Okay. Exodus 19, let's look at 12. You shall set bounds for the people all around you, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow, whether man or beast. And I'll be honest there, I'm not sure if beast is a reference to outsiders of the covenant who had joined in with Israel, or if it's a reference literally to animals. I'm not sure. He shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. Okay? Trumpet sound, they're coming near the mountain, and they're going to go and worship. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. Do not come near your wives. Okay? We're not going to do anything like that. We're going to wash ourselves. We're going to be consecrated and set apart. We're getting serious about this. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud, that's God's presence, on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, like the whole mountain, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of a trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Okay? The Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Notice this. Go down and warn them, lest they break through and look up and see me, okay? So they're standing down there looking up. You get that picture? With me? Now think about it, because we're going to the New Testament. Also let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. But Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds around it on the mountain and consecrate it. Then the Lord said to him, away, get down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. This is the same idea, okay? Now think about this. We're in the same time frame, and we're in the same period as Pentecost, because that's where we're at, okay? In this whole grand scheme of things, Passovers happen in Egypt, unleavened breads happen in Egypt, first fruits when we pass through the Red Sea. 50 days later, in the third month, we wind up at Pentecost, and we're on the mountain. Everybody with me? And we're going to spend about 40 days here around this mountain. With me? Moses, during this time, these 40 days, what he's going to wind up doing at the end of it is ascending up to the mountain to meet with God. Sound like a familiar story? Passover, unleavened bread, Jesus rises from the dead, first fruits. 50 days later, Pentecost happens. Holy Spirit comes. You get your fire. You get all the same things that you just heard right there in that deal. And then how many days did Jesus spend with them before he ascended up into heaven? 40. See your picture? Isn't that good? Same idea. Jesus is the new Moses. But Jesus didn't come back down. He had other messengers that were on the earth. His people, Acts chapter 1, verse 6, before he ascended, you will be my witnesses. And they were his witnesses. And that's what they did. Amen? All right. I'm going to end that there tonight and leave it alone. Is that okay? Did you get that? Here's why I'm going to end that. Because I think I'm fixing to have to go do this game time because I don't think Justin or Matt are here. So, is that okay? All right. I'm going to cover that some more. I'm going to spend a little bit of time, probably like 1 week on the Ten Commandments, if that's okay with y'all, and just at least give some thoughts on it. I'm probably going to teach about taking the Lord's name in vain differently than you've ever heard it. So, not that what we've heard is wrong, but probably just add to it a little bit as far as some thoughts. So, plan on doing some of that, and I'm going to revisit some of this next week. So I'll come back to it and kind of walk us into the first commandment, Exodus 20. So let's pray, and we'll be dismissed.